Police dispatchers work in the space between the living and whatever calls from beyond it. While the city sleeps, they remain awake in darkened rooms, headsets pressed to their ears, answering voices that emerge from the static, voices reporting things that shouldn't exist. The image before you captures this reality. A lone dispatcher silhouetted against monitor glow, staring through a window into the profound darkness of the graveyard shift. Outside, the world holds its breath. Inside, they wait for the next call. Unlike folklore or campfire stories, the encounters documented in police dispatch logs carry a different weight. They are recorded, time-stamped, archived in audio files that can be replayed and verified. The voices are real. The terror is real. The evidence exists. This is the burden of being a professional witness to the impossible. Dispatchers operate in a space most people never consider. They see terror unfold in real time but remain physically removed from it, unable to see what's happening, unable to intervene beyond relaying information to officers who must then walk into the unknown. They become repositories of impossible testimonies, confessions whispered by callers who know they sound insane, descriptions of entities that have no place in training manuals, final words from people who vanish before help arrives. The 4 cases documented in this narrative represent only a fraction of what accumulates in dispatch archives across the country. A woman in Seattle who calmly reports watching herself sleep while something else occupies her body. A family in rural Maine discovered sitting motionless in absolute darkness, their eyes reflecting light like animals. A security guard trapped by an elevator that hunts him floor by floor, wet footprints emerging from its empty chamber. A highway patrol officer pursued through mirrors by something that exists only in reflection. These are not urban legends. These are logged incidents with case numbers, audio recordings, and the testimonies of trained professionals whose credibility is suddenly called into question the moment they report what they actually witnessed. The psychological toll is immense. How do you maintain rationality when your job requires you to document the irrational? How do you trust your senses when your senses report something your training says is impossible? How do you file a report when the truth sounds like fiction and fiction would be easier to believe? Most importantly, what happens when the boundary between you and the calls you answer begins to dissolve? When the dispatcher monitoring the darkness realizes the darkness is monitoring them back. This is not a story about ghosts haunting abandoned houses or demons possessing the unwary. This is a story about the professionals who stand between the sleeping world and whatever prowls through the hours when most people are unconscious. They don't seek these encounters. They don't volunteer for this aspect of their profession. But night after night, shift after shift, they put on the headset and answer the calls that come from the edge of comprehension. Because someone has to. Because the alternative, silence, is somehow worse than bearing witness to the impossible. What follows are 4 documented cases that stripped away the professional detachment of those who encountered them. These accounts come from dispatch logs, officer testimony, audio recordings, and the quiet admissions shared between colleagues who know that speaking too loudly about these experiences means risking their careers. The recordings exist. The witnesses are credible. The evidence cannot be explained away. And somewhere in the darkness beyond your window, at this very moment, another dispatcher is putting on their headset and preparing for the graveyard shift, unaware that tonight they might receive a call that will change what they believe is possible. The question is not whether these events occurred. The question is what we do when the impossible has a case number and a timestamp. The call came into Seattle's King County Dispatch at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, logged under case number 2019-04-1847. The voice on the line belonged to a woman named Sarah Chen, 32 years old, residing alone in a Capitol Hill apartment. Her tone was what veteran dispatcher Marcus Webb would later describe as inappropriately calm, like someone reporting a broken streetlight, not a home invasion. "I need to report something," Sarah said, her words measured and flat. "I'm watching myself sleep right now. I'm standing at the foot of my bed, and I can see myself lying there. But I'm also the one making this call. I don't think I'm supposed to be awake." Webb followed protocol, keeping his voice steady as he asked for her address and whether she was in immediate danger. The line stayed open. Standard procedure for potential psychiatric episodes or intruder situations. Maintain contact, assess threat level, dispatch officers. But as Webb typed the notes into the system, he heard something that made his fingers pause over the keyboard. Two distinct patterns of breathing. One close to the phone, shallow and regular. Another deeper in the room, slower, the rhythm of someone in REM sleep. Then footsteps, bare feet on hardwood, moving away from where the phone voice originated. "Are you moving right now?" Webb asked. "No," Sarah replied, still in that eerily flat tone. "I'm standing completely still, but I can see myself walking closer. I'm getting a better look at my face. My eyes are open, but I don't think I'm looking at anything." Webb dispatched 2 units immediately, flagging the call as a possible break-in, with the resident experiencing acute psychological distress. Officers Patricia Morrison and James Del Rio arrived within 6 minutes. Their body camera footage shows them approaching the second-floor apartment, door unlocked, interior lights off. Morrison announced their presence. No response. They found Sarah Chen unconscious in her bed, dressed in the same pajamas she'd described wearing during the 911 call. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of another person in the apartment. The bedroom window was locked from the inside. Sarah's phone lay on the nightstand beside her. Screen dark. Last call logged to 911 at 2:47 a.m. Duration, 11 minutes, 42 seconds. But here's what the official report couldn't explain. The 911 recording captured not just Sarah's voice, but those footsteps Webb had heard, moving across the room in a direction that didn't correspond to the unconscious woman's position in bed. Audio analysis confirmed the footsteps were real, not artifacts or interference. Someone had been walking in that apartment, while Sarah lay motionless. When Sarah regained consciousness 20 minutes later, she had no memory of making the call. The last thing she remembered was going to bed at midnight after finishing a book. She listened to the recording of her own voice, flat and emotionless, describing watching herself from across the room, and began to cry. "That's me talking," she whispered to Officer Morrison. "But I don't remember any of it. Where was I? If I was asleep the whole time, who made that call?" The case was eventually filed as a sleepwalking episode with possible dissociative features. But Marcus Webb still has the audio file saved on his personal drive. Sometimes, late in his shift when the calls slow down, he plays it back and listens to those footsteps that shouldn't exist, moving through an apartment where only one person slept. The Howell family had lived on Timber Ridge Road in rural Aroostook County for 16 years without incident. Quiet people. According to their neighbors, the father taught at the local high school, the mother worked from home as a medical transcriber, 2 teenage daughters who kept to themselves. So when Margaret Pritchard called 911 at 9:34 p.m. on a January evening reporting screams coming from the Howell residence, dispatcher Annie Cousins took it seriously. "It's not arguing," Margaret said, her voice tight with concern. "It's screaming. All of them. Like they are all screaming at once. Then it just stops. Then it starts again. I've never heard anything like it." Deputies Ryan Bouchard and Lisa Chen arrived 14 minutes later, their cruiser crunching over frozen gravel. The house stood dark against the snow. Not a single light visible in any window. Bouchard's body camera captured their approach, his flashlight beam cutting through the bitter cold as he knocked on the front door. No answer. He tried the handle. Unlocked. "We coming in," Bouchard radioed to Cousins. No lights on. Door was open. They entered cautiously, flashlights sweeping the foyer. The house was cold, colder than it should have been with the heat presumably running. Bouchard called out, identifying themselves as sheriff's deputies. Silence. Then Chen's light found them. The entire family sat at the dining room table. Father at the head, mother to his right, both daughters across from each other. For people sitting in absolute darkness, perfectly still, hands folded on the table in front of them, like they were waiting for a meal that would never arrive. "Jesus Christ," Chen whispered, her transmission crackling through Cousin's headset. Bouchard tried the light switch. Nothing. He tried another. Nothing. Every light in the house was dead, but when he checked the breaker box in the hallway, everything was on. The electricity was flowing, but no bulb would illuminate. "Mr. Howell." Bouchard's voice was steady, professional. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Are you folks all right?" No response. The family didn't move, didn't acknowledge the officer's presence. Bouchard stepped closer, his flashlight beam sweeping across their faces. That's when Cousins heard Chen's sharp intake of breath through the radio. "Their eyes," Chen said. "Bouchard, their eyes are reflecting." The beam caught them one by one, 4 sets of eyes glowing in the flashlight like an animal's tapetum lucidum, that reflective layer that makes a deer's eyes shine in headlights. But humans don't have that. Human eyes don't reflect light that way. Bouchard reached out and touched the father's shoulder. No response. He shook him gently. Nothing. The man's skin was cold through his shirt, his body rigid but not with rigor mortis, with something else, some terrible tension that kept him upright and motionless. "Dispatch, we need backup and medical," Bouchard said, his voice finally cracking. "We've got 4 unresponsive individuals, possible carbon monoxide or..." He stopped. Cousins heard it through the radio, that moment of absolute silence before Chen started screaming. All 4 members of the Howell family had simultaneously turned their heads toward the officers. Not their bodies, just their heads, moving in perfect mechanical unison. And they were smiling. All 4 of them. The exact same smile. "Get out!" Chen shouted. "Bouchard, get out now!" The transmission cut to static. When backup arrived 12 minutes later, they found both deputies standing in the driveway, pale and shaking. The Howell family was still inside, still sitting at that table in the darkness, still smiling. The Meridian Tower in downtown Phoenix housed corporate offices across 18 floors, all vacant after business hours except for the security presence on the 9th floor. Thomas Garrett had worked the graveyard shift for 3 years without incident. He knew every shadow, every ambient noise, every quirk of the building's aging infrastructure. So when he called 911 at 3:47 a.m., dispatcher Rachel Soto could hear in his voice that something was fundamentally wrong. "The elevator keeps coming to my floor," Thomas said, his words tight and controlled. "It's been doing it for the past 20 minutes. Every few minutes, the doors open. Nobody gets out, but there are wet footprints on the floor, coming from the elevator, walking toward my desk." Soto could hear it through the phone, the rhythmic ding of the elevator bell, distant but distinct. She asked if he could see anyone on the security cameras. Thomas said he'd been watching them. The elevator was empty. Every time. The camera inside showed nothing but an empty car with fluorescent lights and mirrored walls. Yet when the doors opened on the 9th floor, wet footprints appeared on the tile, leading out into the hallway. "Sir, I'm dispatching officers to your location," Soto said, keeping her tone professional despite the elevator bell dinging again through the phone. "Can you describe the footprints?" "Bare feet," Thomas whispered. "Human-shaped, but the water, it's not drying. It just sits there. These puddles in the shape of footprints, and they are getting closer every time. I'm watching them on the monitor right now. The elevator's coming up again." The ding sounded closer this time. Soto heard Thomas's breathing quicken. "Floor 9, Thomas said quietly, as if afraid to speak too loudly. "Doors are opening. Nothing there. Camera shows empty, but I can see them. New footprints. Jesus, they're coming down the hallway. They are not going anywhere else. They are just coming toward me." Soto tracked the responding officers on her screen. Still 8 minutes out, she asked Thomas to stay on the line, to keep talking to her, but he'd gone quiet except for his breathing. Then the elevator bell rang again, and this time Soto could hear it clearly through the phone. Not distant anymore, but close, as if the phone itself was near the elevator shaft. "It's early," Thomas said, his voice barely audible. "It usually waits longer between trips. Why is it coming back so fast?" "Thomas, can you move to a different location? Exit the floor. The footprints are between me and the stairwell. I'd have to walk through them. I'd have to step in them." The ding came again. "Closer. Impossibly closer. They're at the end of the hallway now," Thomas whispered. "The puddles. I can see them reflecting the emergency lights. They are just standing there. They've stopped walking." Soto heard the elevator bell one more time, so close it distorted through the phone's speaker. Then Thomas made a sound. Not quite a scream, more like a strangled intake of breath, the noise someone makes when they suddenly understand something terrible. The line went dead. Officers found Thomas Garrett 40 minutes later, unconscious on the 9th floor, collapsed near his desk. The elevator was on the ground floor. The hallway was completely dry, but security footage showed something that made the responding officers request the building be cleared and investigated. For exactly 23 minutes, the elevator had traveled between floors with no one calling it, stopping exclusively at the 9th floor, doors opening to an empty car. And in one frame, just visible in the mirrored wall of the elevator, something that looked like wet footprints on a surface that should have been dry. Nevada State Trooper David Messina had patrolled Route 375 for 7 years, the stretch of desolate highway locals called the Extraterrestrial Highway due to its proximity to restricted military airspace. He'd seen strange lights, dealt with confused tourists, and logged countless hours driving through absolute darkness with nothing but sagebrush and stars for company. But his transmission to dispatcher Elena Ruiz at 1:23 a.m. on an October night was unlike anything in his service record. "Dispatch, I've got a pedestrian in the roadway, mile marker 47. Requesting backup for welfare check." Standard procedure. Ruiz logged it and waited. Messina's dashcam footage, later reviewed by investigators, showed his cruiser's headlights cutting through the desert darkness, illuminating the empty 2-lane highway ahead. Then, roughly 200 yards out, the beams caught something standing in the center of the road. A pale, humanoid shape, arms at its sides, facing the approaching vehicle. "Dispatch, visual confirmed. Subject is not moving. Approximately 6 feet tall. Appears." Messina's voice cut off. On the dashcam, the figure remained perfectly visible in the headlights for 3 seconds. Then, the instant the full beam intensity touched it, the shape vanished. Not quickly, not in a blur of movement. It simply ceased to exist between one frame and the next. "Dispatch, subject has fled the roadway. I'm stopping to investigate." Ruiz could hear the uncertainty in his voice, that careful professional tone officers use when they are not sure what they've just witnessed. The dashcam showed Messina exiting his vehicle, flashlight sweeping the desert on both sides of the road. Nothing. No footprints in the sand. No disturbed brush. No thermal signature on his handheld scanner. Just empty highway stretching into darkness. Negative contact, Messina reported. Returning to vehicle. That's when it happened. Messina opened the driver's door, settled into his seat, and glanced at his rearview mirror in that automatic way every driver does. Ruiz heard his sharp intake of breath through the radio. "It's in the mirror," Messina said, his voice tight. "Dispatch, it's standing exactly where it was before. I can see it in my rearview. But when I look back through the windshield, there's nothing there." Ruiz heard the cruiser's engine rev as Messina accelerated. The dashcam showed the highway rushing past, the speedometer climbing to 70, then 80. But Messina's breathing was getting faster, ragged. "It's closer," he said. "Every time I look at the mirror, it's closer. It's not on the road anymore. It's following me. Elena, it's following me through the fucking mirror." "David, what's your current location?" Ruiz kept her voice steady, professional, even as the hair rose on her arms. "Mile marker 52. I'm not stopping. I can't stop. It's right behind the car now. Right behind me. I can see it in the mirror. Its face is pressed against the rear window, but there's nothing there when I turn around. There's nothing actually there." The cruiser's speed hit 9 to 5. Ruiz could hear Messina's breathing, quick and panicked. Nothing like the composed officer who'd made the initial call 10 minutes earlier. "Its hand is on the glass," Messina whispered. "In the mirror. I can see its hand pressed against the rear window. Fingers spread. But the glass isn't fogging. There's no condensation. Nothing's actually touching it." Then Messina screamed, a raw, primal sound that made Ruiz jerk back from her headset. The transmission dissolved into static, the sound of the cruiser swerving, and Messina's voice, broken and pleading, "Make it stop looking at me." Marcus Webb had been dispatching for King County for 11 years when it happened. The graveyard shift on a Thursday in November. The kind of night where calls come in steady but manageable. Domestic disturbances, traffic accidents, the usual rhythm of human crisis that keeps a city's emergency services moving through the dark hours. He'd handled the Sarah Chen call 6 months prior, still had the audio file saved, still occasionally replayed those impossible footsteps when the shift grew quiet. At 4:17 a.m., with dawn still 2 hours away, Webb received a call that made him freeze at his console. The incoming number on his screen was his own cell phone. Not a similar number. His exact number. The phone currently sitting in his locker in the break room, powered off per department policy. He answered. Protocol demanded it, even as his rational mind rejected what he was seeing. 911. What's your emergency? The voice that responded was his own. Not similar. Not a recording. His own voice, with the same slight rasp he'd developed from years of talking through headsets, the same cadence and inflection he heard in his own head every day. "There's an intruder in the dispatch center," his voice said calmly. "I can see him through the window. He's sitting at console 4, wearing a headset. He looks exactly like me." Webb's hand moved instinctively to his keyboard, fingers hovering over keys he couldn't bring himself to press. Console 4 was his station. He was sitting there now. He turned slowly to look at the window behind him, the one that overlooked the parking lot, and saw his own reflection staring back. But the reflection wasn't moving with him. It was watching, head tilted slightly, as if studying him with clinical curiosity from seconds out of sync with reality. "Sir, can you confirm your location?" Webb heard himself ask in the recording, following protocols his training had drilled into muscle memory. "I'm in the dispatch center," his own voice replied. "I'm the one who should be here. He's the one who shouldn't exist." Webb disconnected the call. His hands were shaking. He pulled up the call log, found the entry time stamped 4:17 a.m., incoming from his cell number, duration 43 seconds. He accessed the audio file and played it back. His own voice, asking for location confirmation. Another voice, also his own, calmly reporting an intruder who looked exactly like him. The shift ended at 6 a.m. Webb filed his reports, logged out of the system, retrieved his phone from his locker. No outgoing calls. The phone had been off the entire shift, but the recording existed in the county's emergency services database, tagged with his operator ID, stamped with time and date, available for review by anyone with proper access. He listened to it 3 more times before leaving the building. Each time, he heard himself having a conversation he had no memory of, reporting an intruder who might have been him or might have been something else wearing his voice like a uniform. This is what no training manual prepares you for. The moment when evidence and experience diverge so completely that you're forced to choose which reality to inhabit. The recording says the call happened. The timestamp confirms it. The audio analysis shows no signs of manipulation or fabrication. But Webb's memory contains only the act of answering, the shock of hearing his own voice, and the reflection that watched him with eyes that moved half a second behind his own. Every dispatcher who works long enough in the dark hours eventually faces this choice. Do you trust the evidence that confirms the impossible? Or do you trust the training that insists the impossible cannot be evidence? Do you file the report honestly and risk your credibility? Or do you classify it as a system glitch and carry the weight of the lie? Webb still works the graveyard shift, still answers calls from voices reporting things that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, in the window's reflection behind his console, he sees himself sitting there. But the reflection puts on the headset a moment before he does, answers calls a second before they come through, lives his life in that terrible gap between what happened and what's happening now. The question isn't whether these events occur. The recordings exist. The timestamps are real. The witnesses are credible professionals trained to observe and document accurately. The question is simpler and more terrifying. When reality itself fragments, which side of the break are you standing on? And if you can't tell the difference, does it matter anymore?